My name is Brady Danner. I'm 38 years old, and the last thing my son said to me before I got on the plane was, "See you at the gate, Dad." 14 months later, a third-grade teacher in a town I had never heard of called my phone and told me that a boy in her classroom had said almost the same words about a man he wasn't supposed to have. By then, my son was legally dead. There was a court order that said so, signed by a judge, filed in a county I pay taxes in. My wife had already spent the money that order released. Welcome back to Story Lab, where we take the stories people wish had stayed quiet and walk through them slowly enough to learn something. And there is a lot to learn in this one, because what happened to my family didn't happen with a weapon. It happened with paperwork. A person can be erased with one signature and a hearing that lasts 11 minutes, and I know that better than most people, because unerasing people on paper is literally my job in the Army. So stay with me. I'm going to show you how a living child gets turned into a line item, how the account that was supposed to protect him became the reason to make him disappear, and the small, boring records that finally pulled him back out. Some of them are records you have in your house right now. Here's how it started. The tent smelled like hot canvas and toner. That was the thing nobody put in the recruiting brochures. Sergeant First Class Brady Danner thought that a war zone could smell like an office supply closet left in the sun. He was on his 4th month of a 9-month rotation, sitting on an ammo crate in a civil affairs tent 800 meters from a runway in the Horn of Africa, sorting through what was left of a district civil registry that had been burned in a raid 19 years earlier. 4,100 people had lived in that district. After the fire, on paper, none of them had. No birth records, no marriage records, no land deeds. Whole families who could not prove they had ever been born. In a country where you cannot enroll a child in school, inherit a field, or claim a body without a document that says you exist. Brady's job was to give them back. It was slow work, and it was the only work he had ever loved. You started with the things that survive fires and militias, because those things are almost never the official ones. Vaccination cards kept in a coffee tin, a mosque's marriage ledger, a school's exam list with 200 children's names in a teacher's careful hand. You laid them out and cross-referenced them until the same human being appeared in 3 independent places, and when that happened, you had a person again. Not a feeling, not a memory, a person you could prove. Sergeant Danner. Sergeant Mona Carden ducked under the tent flap with 2 cups of coffee. You've been on that box since 05. There's a woman in Seal Bard who's been trying to bury her father for 11 years, Brady said. The cemetery won't take him without a death certificate. The clinic won't write one without an identity number. He never had an identity number because the office that issued them burned down. He held up a curling piece of cardstock, but he got a tetanus shot in 2004, and the nurse wrote his name on the card, and her log still exists, so now he does too. Carden shook her head. You're a strange man. I'm a filing clerk with a rifle. It was mostly true, and it had made him very good at something the Army did not put on posters. Civil affairs teams go into places where the record of human beings has been destroyed on purpose, because destroying the record is how you take everything else. Land, children, inheritance. Brady had spent 11 years learning the anatomy of an erasure, how it's done, and the one thing that always undoes it. Somewhere out there, something with a date on it survived. He kept a photograph taped inside the lid of his footlocker. It was a bad photograph, overflashed, taken in the kitchen of a rented ranch house at 41 Sumac Lane in Bel Harrow, Kansas. In it, a 7-year-old boy with a cowlick that would not lie down was holding a piece of laminated paper up to the camera with both hands like a trophy. Brady had made that laminated card himself the week before he left, on the machine at the copy shop by the grain elevator, for $4 and change. On the front, he had put Leo's photograph, his full legal name, Leo James Danner, his date of birth, his father's name and unit, his mother's name, his blood type, and his allergies. On the back, he had written 3 lines by hand. The first line was their address. The second line was the phone number of Brady's sister Beth, who was an emergency room nurse in Wichita and who had never once failed to pick up a phone in her life. The third line was the family's control question, which was a thing Brady had brought home from work without meaning to, the way a carpenter brings home sawdust. In tracing work, When you're trying to confirm that a person on the other end of a radio is really the person a family is looking for, you don't ask them their name. Names are cheap. You ask them a question only that family knows the answer to. In the field, they called it a proof of life question. In the Danner house, Leo called it the secret handshake. Which was better? What do we say instead of goodbye? Brady had asked him, kneeling in the driveway with his duffel already in the truck. We don't say it, Leo said. We say, see you at the gate. And why don't we say goodbye? Because goodbye means it's over, and we're not over. Copy, Brady said. Keep your card. In my sock, Leo said solemnly, because he had lost it twice already in a month, and Brady had laminated the third one with a punch hole in the corner and a bootlace through it. Behind them in the doorway, Thora had watched with her arms folded, and a look Brady had told himself was sadness. They had been married 9 years. Thora Halloway had been the girl who could make a room decide to have a good time, and for a long stretch that had been exactly what a quiet man like Brady needed. She had started a home staging business in the last boom, and for 2 good years she had been genuinely successful, photographed for a regional magazine, quoted about accent walls. Then the boom ended. She kept the leased SUV and the storage unit full of rented furniture and the appearance of the thing for 3 more years, on credit, and by the time Brady understood how bad it was, the number had a comma in a place he had not expected. He had come home from a rotation to a certified letter about a lien and spent his block leave making a budget with her at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. She cried. She agreed to all of it. 2 weeks later, he found a receipt for a $900 chair. And then there was the other money, the money that sat in the middle of that marriage like a piece of furniture nobody would talk about. For 6 years, the Danners had lived in privatized family housing on Fort Larimer. The well field that supplied it had been contaminated for 2 decades, and the property management company had known for 11 of them. The class action took 4 years. The settlement paid the adults almost nothing, and it paid the children, the ones with documented, ongoing conditions, a great deal. Leo Danner, who had spent 106 nights of his short life on a nebulizer, was awarded $460,000. Because he was a minor, that money did not go to his parents. It went where every state puts a child's money, into a blocked, court-supervised account, under a district judge and a court-appointed conservator, where it would sit and earn interest until Leo James Danner turned 18 and signed for it himself. Nobody could touch it. Not Brady, not Thora. Withdrawals required a petition, a hearing, a finding that the expense was for the child's direct benefit, and the signature of the conservator, a semi-retired estate attorney named Marcia Dyer who had been doing that job for 22 years and who read every single line. Brady had thought of that account the way you think of a wall in your house, solid, boring, there. He had never once thought about what happens to a blocked account when the child it belongs to stops, legally, existing. The call came at 3 in the morning, local, which in Kansas was 6 in the evening. He was walking back from the shower trailer with a towel over his shoulder when the duty NCO came out of the operations tent at a jog, and Brady knew from 30 meters out, because nobody jogs to give you good news. Thora was crying so hard the first 4 sentences were unusable. He stood in the dark in his shower shoes and did the thing he did at work, which was to stop listening for feeling and start listening for facts. Ryburn Park, the playground on the north side. She had taken Leo at about 4:30. She had been on the phone with her brother. She turned around and he wasn't on the climbing structure. She looked for 20 minutes before she called anyone. There was a truck, maybe gray, maybe a Silverado, that a woman thought she had seen leaving the north lot. Say the time again, Brady said. What? The time you called it in. Say it again. Brady, our son is gone. I know. Say the time. She said a time. He wrote it on the inside of his forearm with a pen he'd taken from the ops tent because he did not have paper and because a man who has spent his whole career telling other people that memory is not evidence does not get to make an exception for himself. Then he went and woke his commander. Major Katerina Sorel signed the emergency leave request at 4:15 in the morning in a t-shirt and PT shorts, and then she stood between Brady and the door of her office for a moment. Danner, listen to me before you get on that plane. You're about to be the most useful person in that town, and also the most suspected one. Do you understand what I'm telling you? The father, Brady said. The father, especially a father who's been out of the country. They will build the story around you if you give them a place to nail it. She handed him the paperwork. So don't give them one. Write everything down. Times, names, who told you what. You already know how to do this. Do it for yourself. He was on a rotator out of Djibouti, 11 hours later. He did not sleep. He sat with a legal pad on his knee and started a timeline, the same way he would have for a village. And by the time the wheels touched down in Kansas City, he had 4 pages of it, and 3 questions he could not make fit. The first was why a woman who had lost sight of her child on a playground had spent 20 minutes looking before calling 911. The second was why the call had come from her brother's phone. And the third, the one that would take him 14 months and a stranger in Idaho to answer, was why, when he had asked her what Leo was wearing that afternoon, his wife had described, in exact and confident detail, the outfit in the photograph taped inside the lid of his footlocker, the one taken 11 months earlier. The one Brady was the only person in the world holding. Bell Harrow, Kansas, is 9,000 people, a grain elevator, 2 stoplights and a lake, and for 6 days in September it was the center of the world. The response was, Brady would say later, magnificent. That was the word he used, and he never took it back. 240 volunteers signed the sheet at the fire station the first morning. The co-op donated fuel. Somebody's aunt made 400 sandwiches. Men who had not spoken since a fence line argument in 2009 walked 10 feet apart across a soybean field for 11 hours. Divers came from 3 counties for the lake. Brady walked lines until his boots came apart, and in between he did the other thing. He canvassed, not the way the deputies did, with a clipboard, but the way he canvassed a village, looking for the things that keep time, whether or not anybody is watching them. The trash service ran Ryburn Park's cans Tuesdays and Fridays, which put the Friday truck at the north lot at approximately 4:50. The park's irrigation controller kicked the sprinklers on at 5:15, and the woman who thought she'd seen a gray truck had told a deputy she'd gotten wet, which put her in that lot after 5:15, not at 4:30. The quick serve at the highway junction kept its camera footage for 30 days on a machine in a back room, and the manager, a young man named Gil Sunderland, let Brady sit on a milk crate and watch all of it, twice. There was no gray truck. There was, at 4:51, Thora's white Acadia leaving the north lot, southbound, alone, with the tailgate up. Brady sat in that back room and looked at the frozen frame for a long time. Then he asked Gil Sunderland to burn him a copy, and Gil said he wasn't sure he was allowed, and Brady said that was fine and asked him to write down on the back of a receipt the date, the time, the make and model of the recorder, and his own name, and to sign it. Gil did. Brady folded it into his wallet behind his ID card. That receipt would still be in that wallet 14 months later. It would be the second thing he handed to a federal prosecutor. He took the footage to Detective Sergeant Alan Kirby of the county sheriff's office, and Kirby watched it and rubbed his face and said what a tired man says, that a mother leaving a park to drive the loop looking for her own kid is the most natural thing in the world, that the tailgate had probably been up all day, and that the woman with the sprinklers was 71 and had already given them 3 different versions. He was not corrupt. He was not lazy. He was one detective with a missing child, 40 tips a day, a lake, and a sheriff up for re-election. He had already decided what kind of case it was, and everything after that got filed under that heading. Brady said, "Sergeant, I'm not telling you it means something. I'm telling you it's inconsistent, and I'd like it in the file as an inconsistency, and I'd like to be told in writing that it's in the file." Kirby looked at him with something like dislike. "You always talk like this?" "Yes." By the 4th day, the tone had changed. Brady felt it before he could name it. A coolness in the fire station. A woman who moved her folding chair. Then his sister Beth, who had driven up from Wichita with a cooler of food and had not left, put her phone in front of him at the sandwich table. It was a 52-second clip from a Wichita morning show. Kirk Holloway sat in a studio chair in a quarter-zip pullover with his sister's family photograph on the screen behind him, and he was very, very good at it. That was the part Brady would never entirely get over. Kirk had a two-man advertising shop and a Friday radio segment about local businesses, and he had exactly the voice for this. Gentle, wounded, reasonable. "Thora's been carrying this alone for a long time," Kirk said. "I don't want to speak out of turn about my brother-in-law. He has a career, and I respect that. But Leo has been raised, really raised, day to day, by one parent. And I think people should understand that when they see a man show up in a uniform for the cameras." Brady watched it twice. "You're going to want to go on that show," Beth said. "I'm not going to go on that show." "Good, that's what he wants. That's a man building a wall and hoping you'll come stand behind it." 3 days later, the Bell Herald-Ledger ran it on the front page. The reporter's name was Rita Lindquist, 26 years old, 2 years out of school, working a paper down to 4 employees. She had called Brady twice. He had not called back because he was on a search line both times, and because he did not think it was right to talk to the press about his own son while 200 volunteers were in a field for free. She wrote the story with what she had, and what she had was Kirk. Soldier walked away, a Bell Harrow mother's years alone. Brady read it standing up in the fire station kitchen at 6 in the morning, and he learned something about himself, which was that his hands did not shake, they got very still instead. The article said he had been overseas by choice for most of Leo's life, which was true and meaningless. He had been overseas because that is what the Army does with you, and he had sent home 91% of his pay for 9 years, a number he could prove with 9 years of bank statements he had, of course, kept. It said the family had struggled financially in his absence, which inverted the entire truth so cleanly he almost admired it. And under all of it, in a pull quote, "He's a good soldier. I don't know if anybody ever asked him to be a good father." That afternoon, the volunteer sheet at the fire station had 31 names on it. The next day it had 19. By the second week the searches were over, and Brady's emergency leave was too. He went to see Kirby one last time with a folder. In it were his timeline, the quick serve receipt, the sprinkler controller's log, the trash schedule, and a 1-page memo of the 6 inconsistencies he had found in the accounts given by his wife and her brother, written in the flat, numbered, unemotional style the Army had spent a decade beating into him. Kirby read the first page and set it down. "Sergeant Danner," he said, "you want me to look at your wife. I want you to look at the timeline, because I have to tell you honestly, from where I sit, this looks like a man building a case against the woman who's divorcing him." Brady's face did not change. "She's divorcing me?" There was a silence in that office that lasted, by Brady's count, 6 seconds. The petition had been filed the previous Thursday. It included an emergency request for exclusive use of the marital home, on the grounds that Brady's return had been destabilizing during a family crisis. It had been granted temporarily without a hearing, because he was, again, out of the country in 11 days, and because there was no one in that courtroom to say otherwise. He flew back to Djibouti on a Tuesday. He would tell people later that this was the hardest single act of his life, harder than the reunion, harder than the courtroom, harder than the thing in Idaho. Getting on that plane, Beth drove him to the airport in Kansas City and gripped the wheel at 10 and 2 the whole way, and did not cry until the drop-off lane. "Say why I'm doing this," he said. "Because if you go absent without leave, you lose your job, your clearance, and your credibility. And then you're just a guy in a town that already thinks you walked away. And because I'm staying, I'm not going anywhere until we get him." She wiped her face. "Now say the thing." He looked at his sister and his throat closed and he said, "See you at the gate." 2 weeks after he landed back in country, Marcia Dyer, the court-appointed conservator of the blocked account holding Leo James Danner's $460,000, filed a 2-page objection. She had received a letter from an attorney representing the mother, inquiring about the procedure for accessing the account in the event of a determination regarding the minor's status. Dyer wrote that such an inquiry, made 18 days after a child's disappearance, was premature and inappropriate, and asked the court to order that no petition affecting the account proceed without notice to the child's father, who was deployed. 9 days later, Marcia Dyer was replaced. The motion to substitute cited her unavailability due to health and was unopposed, because the only person who would have opposed it was in a tent 8,000 miles away and had not been served. The service list showed him at 41 Sumac Lane, Bell Harrow, Kansas, a house he no longer had legal access to, where his mail was being collected by his wife. The new conservator was an attorney named Bennett Sorrell, 44, a small estates practice in a strip mall 1 county over, a boat payment he was behind on, and 2 years as Kirk Halloway's college roommate. Marcia Dyer, for the record, was not ill. She was 73, played competitive bridge twice a week, and had never in her life asked to be relieved of a file. She went home and put her objection and the substitution order in a manila folder, and wrote on the tab in pencil, "Danner, something wrong here," and put it in the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet in her sunroom. The petition was filed on a Monday in January. It ran to 11 pages, and Brady Danner would eventually be able to recite whole sentences of it from memory, the way other men can recite a song from a bad year. It asked the District Court of Ryburn County, Kansas, to find that the minor child Leo James Danner, having disappeared under circumstances indicating exposure to specific peril, and having been the subject of an exhaustive search yielding no evidence of life for more than 90 days, be presumed deceased for the limited purposes of administering his estate. Attached were 17 exhibits, a search summary, a letter from Detective Sergeant Kirby, entirely truthful, stating the investigation had produced no viable leads, 200 pages of tip logs, a psychological evaluation of the mother describing acute grief, a dive report from the lake, a letter from the Bring Leo Home Fund, a Kansas nonprofit organized 4 months earlier, President Kirk Halloway, describing the exhaustion of its search efforts, and a declaration from the father. That was the exhibit Brady learned about last and never got over. A single page, bearing an electronic signature block with his name and rank, stating that he had no objection to the relief requested. It had been generated from a mobile signing application under an account created with an email address 1 character different from his. The hearing was held on a Wednesday morning at 9:15. Judge Karen Sperling had a criminal docket at 10 and 41 matters on the calendar. The presumption petition was unopposed. Nobody appeared to contest it. Brady had, in fact, tried. He had learned about the hearing 11 days before it, from Marcia Dyer, who was no longer on the case and had no business calling him, and did it anyway from her sunroom at 4 in the morning her time. What followed was the part of the story that made people angriest when he told it, because there was no villain in it at all. He wrote to the court. His email went to a general clerk's inbox that received 400 messages a day and was answered in the order received. He filed a handwritten objection through his unit's legal assistance office. It arrived certified on the Thursday after the hearing. He asked to appear by telephone. That required a motion, and a motion had to be filed by a party, and he was not, in the caption of that proceeding, a party. The petitioner was the estate, and the estate was represented by its conservator, Bennett Sorrell. He was 11.5 time zones away, on a satellite connection, trying to argue standing with a clerk in a courthouse that closed at 4:30. At 9:22 on a Wednesday morning in Kansas, Judge Karen Sperling read a summary, asked 2 questions, and granted the petition. It took 11 minutes. Brady learned about it because of a banking alert. It was the last thread of their shared life that neither of them had thought about. A text notification on a joint savings account, $4.11 in it, opened at a credit union in 2017 for a vacation they never took. She had never closed it. He had never removed his number. At 2 in the morning in a tent in the Horn of Africa, Brady Danner's phone lit up on his chest and told him that a transfer of $460,118 had posted to an account ending in the same 4 digits as the one he was staring at, and for 11 seconds he thought, with a lurch of animal hope, that it was some kind of ransom. Then he read the memo line, Estate of L.J. Danner, final distribution. He got up. He walked out past the generators to the edge of the pad where the lights stopped, and he stood in the dark for a while with his hands laced on top of his head like a man who has just run a long way, and he made a sound that a young specialist on guard 50 meters off would later describe, without any embarrassment at all, as the worst thing he ever heard. Then Brady Danner went back inside, and he found a pen, and he wrote at the top of a fresh legal pad, Danner, Leo James, restoration file, day 1. The next 11 days were the worst of his career. He did not eat. He drafted an email to Kirk Holloway at 4 in the morning that would have ended his career if he had sent it, and he did not send it, and he never deleted it either. On the 12th day, Major Sorrell put him on a chair in her office and closed the door. "You've got 2 roads," she said. "You can go home and do something loud. It'll feel like the only honest thing you've ever done, and you will lose your clearance, your job, your income, your credibility, and any court's willingness to listen to you. And your son, if your son is alive, will grow up with a father he can't see because of what his father did in a parking lot." Brady did not answer. "Or you can do the thing you are the best in this battalion at, and do it on your own family. It will take a year and it will feel like nothing. And it will work. Ma'am, with respect, registry restoration works because there are surviving documents." Major Sorrell leaned forward. "Sergeant, your wife just moved $460,000 through a court. Do you know how much paper that makes?" He sat with that. He thought about a burned district office and about the fact that the fire had never actually been the problem. The fire had only destroyed the copy the government kept. Everything else survived, out in the world, because human beings cannot stop making records of themselves. An erasure is not a deletion. An erasure is a claim, and a claim can be checked. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He asked for one thing, to finish the rotation, then be assigned within driving distance of Kansas. Sorrell got him to a civil affairs battalion at Fort Riley, 2 hours and 10 minutes from Bell Harrow. He drove it, over the next 14 months, 131 times. He never once tried to prove that Thora had taken Leo. He knew from 11 years of work that trying to prove the big thing directly is how amateurs fail. Instead, he built the boring things and let them stack. A movement timeline of every person in that family for the 90 days around the disappearance, using only records created by someone with no stake in the outcome. Toll transponder statements, which he was entitled to as a joint account holder. Cell phone bills, same. The bank's ledger. The quick serve footage. A Little League roster. And the school's attendance export, which any parent can request, and which he requested in writing, in the correct form, from the correct office, and received in 11 days. The attendance export was the first real crack. Leo Danner had been withdrawn from Bell Harrow Elementary on a Thursday in early September, 4 days before he vanished from Ryburn Park. The withdrawal form said the family was relocating out of state and requested that records be held for transfer. No transfer request had ever come. Brady sat in his truck outside the district office and read that line 11 times. Nobody had ever noticed it, because nobody had ever had a reason to look at a school withdrawal form in a missing child case. The child was missing. Of course he wasn't in school. The second crack took him 5 more months, and it came from a woman with a card table and a metal stamp. Kansas, like most states, requires a notary public to keep a journal, a bound book with a numbered line for every notarized signature, the date, the document type, and the signer's thumbprint or identification. Most people have no idea those books exist. Brady knew, because in his job, the notary journal is often the only surviving proof of a transaction in a country whose registry burned. He did not know which notary, so he did it the slow way. He got the list of every commissioned notary in Ryburn and the 3 adjoining counties, a public record, $49, mailed to him in a week, and he called all 182 of them, asking one question. In the first 2 weeks of September of that year, do you have any entry in your journal involving the name Holloway or the name Danner? Number 141 was a 71-year-old woman named Edith Fontaine, who ran a tax preparation table out of the front room of an insurance office in a town of 600 people and did notarizations for $5, mostly for farmers. She was quiet for a while on the phone. Then she said, "Young man, I'm going to tell you a date, and then I'm going to tell you I can't tell you anything else without a subpoena, and then I'm going to hope you're the kind of person who knows how to get one." The date she gave him was 3 weeks before Leo Danner disappeared from a playground. The document was a limited power of attorney granting temporary care, custody, and educational authority over a minor child to a married couple in another state. Edith Fontaine had thumbprinted the signer, as the statute required. The signer had signed the name Thora H. Danner, presented a Kansas driver's license, and Edith had written the license number in her small, careful hand, because she had been doing it that way since 1982 and had never once considered doing it differently. Brady thanked her and sat in his truck outside a grain co-op for a long time. Then he called a lawyer, and the lawyer said what lawyers say: a subpoena requires a case, and there was no case. The child was legally dead, the estate was closed, the divorce was final, and Brady Danner had no standing to demand anything from anybody about a boy who did not, in the eyes of the state of Kansas, exist. He needed a living child. He was still 111 days from getting one. The Tuesday it happened, Brady was at a folding table in a classroom at Fort Riley, teaching a block of instruction to 22 junior soldiers about population registries. He had a slide up. It said, "People are hard to erase. They leak." His phone buzzed face down on the table with an area code he did not know, and he let it go, and it buzzed again 40 seconds later, and something in him told him to pick it up. "Is this the father of Leo Danner?" a woman said. 2,000 miles away, in a town called Cobalt Springs, Idaho, a third-grade teacher named Wendy Kiley had spent 9 days working up the nerve to make that call. Wendy was 44, in her 19th year of teaching, and she had a boy in her class named Danny Roby. He had come in during the spring of the previous year, a quiet kid, a good reader, a little too careful. He never talked about before. He flinched at raised voices and kept his hands in his pockets, and Wendy Kiley had seen 100 kids like that and had learned to be patient with the ones who watched the door. 3 things had happened. The first was in October, when a boy in her class said, in the way children do, that Danny didn't have a dad, and Danny said, without any heat at all, "I have a dad. My dad's a soldier. He'll come." The second was that when the class made paper airplanes for a science unit, Danny asked if he could keep the scrap, and she noticed him fold the date off the top of the worksheet and put it in his pocket. She started watching after that, and she saw that he did it constantly. Receipts off the cafeteria floor, the paper band off a stack of library cards, a wristband from the county fair, a parking stub, anything with a date printed on it. He kept them in a rubber band in his backpack in a brick about 2 inches thick, and when a 5th grader knocked his bag off the rack in November and the brick came apart in the hallway, Danny Roby got down on his knees and gathered every single scrap with a face so white that Wendy sent the 5th grader away and got down there with him. The third thing was the card. She only ever saw it once. It was February 17 degrees, and the class was lining up for a fire drill, and Danny pulled his mittens out of his coat pocket, and something laminated came with them and hit the floor, and Wendy Kiley picked it up before he could and had it in her hand for perhaps 2 seconds. There was a photograph of a much younger version of the boy in front of her. There was a name that was not Danny Roby. There was a man's name and a rank and a unit. Danny took it out of her hand, not rudely, but with total, absolute finality, and said, "That's mine." "I know it is," Wendy said. That night she typed the name from the card into a search bar, and the first thing that came up was a 2-year-old newspaper story from Kansas, with a headline about a soldier who walked away. She read it. And then, because she had been a teacher for 19 years and had learned to read one particular thing very well, she looked at the photograph under the headline, a man in uniform and a boy on his shoulders, both squinting into the sun, and she thought, that is not a man who walked away from that child. She sat with it for 9 days. She called the state hotline once and hung up before it connected, because she had made a report 6 years earlier that had gone wrong and had cost a family a great deal, and it had made her careful in a way she was not proud of. Then she found an old missing child flyer, archived on a nonprofit's website, and on the bottom of it, under a photograph of a 7-year-old boy holding a laminated card up to a camera with both hands, there was a phone number for the father. Brady stepped out of that classroom into a hallway and put his back against a cinder block wall. "Ma'am," he said, "I need you to know that I get calls. I've gotten 41 of them. Most of them are people who mean well, and 11 of them were people who wanted money, and one of them was a man who thought it was funny. So I'm going to ask you one question. Not for my sake, for yours, so you know exactly what you're in." "Okay," Wendy Kiley said. "There is a question my son can answer that nobody else on this earth can. It's not a name and it's not a birthday. Anyone can get those. Don't tell him why you're asking. Don't put it in front of him. Just ask him this. Sometime today, like it's nothing. Brady closed his eyes. Ask him what we say instead of goodbye. There was a silence on the line. I already know, Wendy said. I'm sorry. I asked him last Friday. I didn't know I was doing it. A girl in my class was moving away and the kids were saying goodbye and Danny wouldn't say it. He said it like it was a rule. What did he say? He said, we don't say goodbye. He said, we say. Brady Danner had run 3 miles that morning and had a heart rate in the low 50s, and he found out standing in that hallway that a heart can beat hard enough to hurt. We say, see you at the gate. He got a flight out of Kansas City at 10:40 the next morning. He did 4 things before he got on it, and they are the 4 things he is proudest of in his entire life, and none of them are dramatic. He called Val Amory, the family law attorney he had been paying $200 a month for 11 months, to be ready for exactly this, and told her to start drafting a petition to vacate the presumption of death. He called Beth and told her to drive to Marcia Dyer's house in the morning and ask, politely, whether she still had that folder. He called Detective Sergeant Kirby, told him what he had and where he was going, and asked him to notify the sheriff's office in Bonner County, Idaho, so a deputy could be present, specifically so that no one could ever say he had shown up alone and taken a child. And then he wrote down the time of the call, the teacher's full name, the school, and her exact words, and signed and dated it, and put it in his wallet behind the receipt from a gas station in Kansas. Cobalt Springs, Idaho, is a mill town in a valley with mountains on 3 sides, and it was raining when Brady Danner got there. The deputy's name was Tina Whitcomb. She was younger than he expected, and she had read everything he sent overnight, which he had not expected either. She met him in the school parking lot at 1:15 and said, Sergeant, if this is him, we do this slow. That's not for you. That's for the kid. Yes, ma'am. And if it isn't him, then I'll thank her and go home and keep looking. Wendy Kiley had arranged it as well as anyone could have. She kept Danny back to help put out the reading rug, which was a job he liked, and left the classroom door open and told him an hour earlier that a man was coming who had been looking for someone for a long time. Brady stopped in the hallway outside the door because his legs stopped working. Deputy Whitcomb waited with him. She did not rush him. Somewhere down the hall, a bell rang and did not mean anything. Then he went in. The boy was on the floor by the window with his back to the door, unrolling the reading rug. He was taller. That was the thing that took the wind out of Brady. Not the haircut, not the strange coat, but that he was 4 inches taller, and that 4 inches had happened somewhere else, in rooms Brady had never seen and could never get back. Leo, Brady said. The boy went completely still. He got up slowly, and he turned around, and he looked at his father across 19 feet of a classroom in Idaho with an expression Brady could not read at all, and then his face broke, all at once, the way a dam does, from the middle outward. He did not run to him. That is what people always expect, and it is not what happened. He stood exactly where he was, and he held up both hands in front of his chest, the way you hold up something you are turning in. In his left hand was a 2-inch brick of paper scraps in a rubber band. Receipts, ticket stubs, cafeteria dates, a fare wristband, a parking slip, 406 pieces of dated paper, one for almost every day he had been gone. And in his right hand, held out flat like a report card, was the laminated card. The bootlace was gone. The lamination had cracked and been taped, and taped again, and the tape had gone amber, and the photograph of the 7-year-old on the front had worn white where a thumb had rubbed it, over and over, for 14 months. I kept it, Leo said. I kept all of it. I wrote down the days so you'd know where I was. Brady took the card, because his son was holding it out, and his son needed him to take it, and he turned it over. On the back, under his own handwriting, under the address, under Beth's phone number, under the words, "See you at the gate," someone had written in blue ballpoint, in a hand Brady had seen on 9 years of birthday cards from his brother-in-law, received $18,000, paid in full, 3/14, no refunds, do not contact. Brady Danner had spent 11 years being the calmest man in every room he had ever been in. He put his hand flat on the windowsill, and he heard, from a great distance, Deputy Whitcomb say his name once, quietly, the way you say a name to bring somebody back into a room. He was not aware of having made a sound. He would learn later, from Wendy Kiley, that he had said one word, and that the word was please, and that he had said it 4 times. Then his son put a hand on his arm. "Dad," Leo said, "it's okay. I did it right. I kept the dates." And that, not the rage, not the card, not the $18,000, is what Brady Danner will tell you broke him. That his 8-year-old son had spent 14 months building a case file out of trash because his father had once taught him that a thing with a date on it is a witness. That the boy had believed, every single day, that somebody was coming who would need the evidence. He got down on the floor of that classroom, and he held his son, and he said, "You did it perfect. You did it better than I would have." And then, because he was who he was, he asked Deputy Whitcomb for an evidence bag, and he did not put the card in his pocket. He photographed it, front and back, on the classroom floor, with the deputy's badge in the frame for scale and provenance, and he signed the bag, and she signed it, and Wendy Kiley signed it as a witness at 4:17 in the afternoon. Then he called Val Amory and said, "I have him, and I have the receipt." Sid and Carla Roby lived 11 miles up the valley in a double-wide with a good roof and a bad porch. And when Deputy Whitcomb's cruiser came up the drive with Brady Danner's rental behind it, Sid Roby came out onto that porch with his hands already up, palms open, before anyone had said a word. That, Brady would say later, told him almost everything. They were not what he had spent 14 months imagining. Sid was 52 and drove a gravel truck. Carla was 49 and cleaned rooms at the motel by the highway. They had raised 2 boys of their own and buried one of them at 19, and there was a photograph of that boy above the television with a Ranger tab pinned beside it, and Brady looked at it and had to look away. Here is what happened to them, and it happens more than anyone wants to know. Carla had joined a private online group 2 years earlier, one of those places where people who cannot afford $25,000 in agency fees go to find a child, and where people who want to hand off a child go to find them. There are hundreds of these. Most of the people in them are desperate rather than wicked, which is exactly why they work. A man calling himself a family transition facilitator contacted Carla in the winter. He was warm and organized, and he had answers. He said he represented a Kansas mother in an impossible situation, a husband overseas, a violent home, a boy who needed to be somewhere safe fast and quietly. He sent a photograph. He sent a notarized power of attorney, granting the Robys temporary care, custody, and educational authority. He sent a letter on a lawyer's letterhead. He asked for $18,000, which he described as legal and transport costs, in a cashier's check, and he explained kindly that the mother could not have any further contact, and that the boy's name would need to be Danny for a while, for his own protection. Carla and Sid Roby borrowed against the truck. The boy arrived on a March afternoon in a Kia Sorento, driven by a man in a quarter-zip pullover who did not get out and did not shake hands, who handed Carla a backpack and drove away in under 90 seconds. The boy said his name was Leo. The man had said he would say that. They put him in school under the name on the power of attorney. Nobody at Cobalt Springs Elementary did anything wrong. A notarized parental power of attorney is exactly what the enrollment statute requires, and it is checked by a secretary with 200 other things to do. For 14 months, Sid and Carla Roby fed that boy, took him to a dentist, bought him a coat, and did not understand why he would not unpack a single thing, and why he collected paper. "We asked him," Carla said, sitting on the arm of a couch with her hands in her lap. "I asked him 100 times. He'd just say, 'My dad's a soldier, he's going to come.' And I'd say, 'Honey, I know it feels like that.' She stopped. I told him it feels like that. I told a boy his father wasn't coming, for 14 months, in my own house." Sid Roby did not say very much. He went into the back room and came out with a folder, and it was a good folder. Everything in it. The power of attorney with Edith Fontaine's stamp, the lawyer's letterhead, printouts of 9 months of messages, and a photocopy of the cashier's check for $18,000, because Sid Roby had spent 30 years around men who lie about money and had photocopied every check he had ever written since 1996. "I want to say something," Sid said, and then I'll be quiet. I don't expect nothing. We broke the law, probably, and I'll take that. But that boy has slept 11 feet from me for 14 months and he has never once cried where I could hear it. And I want you to know that he did not give up on you. Not for one day. He kept a calendar out of garbage. Brady stood in a stranger's living room in Idaho and shook a gravel truck driver's hand for a long moment. Mr. Roby, he said, you're going to need a lawyer, and I'm going to pay for it. The legal problem, when Val Amory laid it out on a conference table in Kansas 4 days later, was almost funny. Leo James Danner was legally dead. A dead child cannot be the subject of a custody order, because a dead child is not a person, and a person is what a court has jurisdiction over. His social security number was flagged. His state file was closed. He could not be enrolled in a school, insured, treated at a hospital, except as an emergency, or issued so much as a library card. He was, in the exact technical sense, what Brady Danner had spent his career pulling other people back from, an erasure. So we resurrect him, Brady said. Val Amory, who had done family law in Kansas for 24 years, said, that's not a thing we have a form for. Ma'am, Brady said, I've done it 4,000 times. I've just never had to do it in English. The restoration took 9 weeks, and it looked like this. They did not lead with the crime. They led with the child. Amory filed a verified petition to vacate the presumption of death, and the entire filing was built the way Brady built a village registry, on independent, boring, contemporaneous records that no one had made for this purpose. Exhibit A was a DNA report, a swab from a living boy in Idaho, and a swab from Brady Danner, chain of custody documented by a sheriff's deputy. Exhibit B was the school, Cobalt Springs Elementary's enrollment file, attendance for 211 days, and a report card, because nothing in the world says a child is alive like a report card. Exhibit C was 14 months of dated dental x-rays. Exhibit D was the notary journal of Edith Fontaine, line 181. Obtained on a subpoena Val Amory was finally able to issue because there was now, at last, a living petitioner, a thumbprint, a driver's license number. A date 3 weeks before a mother told 240 volunteers that her son had been taken off a climbing structure. Exhibit E was the withdrawal form from Bell Harrow Elementary, dated 4 days before the disappearance. Exhibit F was the quick-serve footage and a receipt signed by a young man named Gil Sunderland. Exhibit G was 406 pieces of paper in a rubber band, photographed, indexed, and dated by a federal evidence technician, a continuous record of the physical presence of Leo James Danner in Bonner County, Idaho, from a Tuesday in March through the day his father walked into his classroom. And Exhibit H was the card, front and back. While Amory built the resurrection, Brady took the photocopied cashier's check to a woman named Cheryl Purnell, a United States postal inspector, because the Bring Leo Home Fund had solicited donations by mail, had received $211,000 of them, and had mailed receipts back. Mail is a federal jurisdiction. Mail is a paper trail, and postal inspectors are the quietest and most patient investigators in the United States. Inspector Purnell listened for 90 minutes without interrupting. Then she said, "Sergeant, do you understand what you've brought me? You haven't brought me a missing child case. You've brought me a completed financial crime with a living witness who kept a diary." Assistant United States Attorney Nina Tesaro took it 11 days later. The theory was clean enough to teach: wire fraud, mail fraud, aggravated identity theft for the forged declaration in Brady's name, and a conspiracy count that swept in the whole architecture, a scheme to obtain the proceeds of a court-supervised minor's account by procuring a judicial declaration through fraud. Bennett Sorrell lasted 4 hours in a proffer room. He had billed the estate $41,000. He had also, being a lawyer, kept his file, including a text from Kirk Halloway that read, "Need her out. Anything. Health." And a second, 11 weeks later, "Is there any world where the school records come up?" And then Norma Halloway, 66, mother of Thora and Kirk, walked into the Wichita field office without a lawyer. She had believed all of it, and that was the thing that had eaten her hollow. She had stood on a search line. She had made 400 sandwiches. She had gone on a morning show with her son and cried real tears about her missing grandson. Then, 2 months earlier, helping Thora move a dresser, she had found a shoebox with a boy's inhaler in it and a spelling test with a gold star, dated 11 days after her grandson supposedly disappeared, mailed from Idaho by a woman named Carla who thought a grandmother would want to see it. "I want it on the record that I did not come here to help myself," Norma Halloway told the agents. "I came here because that little boy thought nobody was coming." The Bring Leo Home Fund's one-year Night of Light was scheduled for a Saturday in September at the Ryburn County Fairgrounds Pavilion. There were going to be 400 people, luminaria bags along the fence line, a high school choir, and a live stream on 3 platforms. Because Kirk Halloway ran the foundation's media, and Kirk Halloway understood that grief, filmed well, is the most durable product there is. Val Amory brought Brady the idea and then immediately told him not to do it. "Ethically, I have to say it out loud. It's theater, it's unnecessary, and the arrests happen either way. Tesoro has indictments sealed and ready." She paused. "It also serves a real purpose, which is that 400 people in that county have believed a specific lie about you for 2 years, and a press release will not reach one of them, and that live stream will reach all of them at once, and your son is going to grow up in that town." Brady thought about it for 2 days. Then he asked the only person whose answer he was going to accept. They were sitting on the tailgate of the truck outside Beth's house in Wichita, with a bag of gas station donuts between them, which had become a thing they did on Sunday mornings. "There's going to be a big event," Brady said. "Everybody in Bell Harrow will be there. Your mom, your Uncle Kirk. We can stay home, and some men in suits will do their jobs on Monday morning, quietly, and almost nobody will ever really understand what happened. Or we can go, you and me, and walk in the front, and everybody will see you, and it will be loud, and there will be cameras, and it will be the hardest 10 minutes of your life." Leo ate a donut and thought about it for what Brady swore was 4 full minutes. "Will they say I'm dead again?" "No, never again. There's a judge's order in my truck right now that says you're alive. It's got a stamp on it." "Can I hold it?" "You can hold it the whole time." "Then I want to go," Leo said, "because they had a whole party about me and I wasn't invited." The pavilion was full at 7:15. Judge Karen Sperling had signed the order, vacating the presumption of death 11 days earlier, in open court, and she had done something judges very rarely do. She had put a paragraph in it that was not required by any statute. "The court finds that these proceedings were procured by fraud upon this court. The court further finds that the father, Sergeant First Class Brady A. Danner, made diligent and repeated efforts to be heard, and that this court's processes failed to hear him. That failure is not the father's. It is this court's, and it is recorded here so that it is not repeated." Brady had that order in a manila envelope. Leo carried it in both hands. At 7:20, Kirk Halloway walked to a microphone under a string of white lights, in a good jacket, with a phone on a gimbal streaming to 1,100 viewers, and began to talk about hope. Rita Lindquist of the Bell Harrow Ledger was standing at the back with a notebook. She was 28 now. She had spent 5 weeks with documents Brady Danner had handed her without a single condition attached, and she had a story written and held, and her editor had a lawyer's letter in his desk clearing it, and she had one thing left to see with her own eyes. The side door opened. What people remembered afterward was not the shouting, because there wasn't any at first. There was a boy in a red coat walking up the center aisle of a pavilion, holding a manila envelope with both hands, and a tall man walking behind him with his hands loose at his sides, and a peculiar silence spreading outward from the back rows, like water going across a floor. Thora Halloway was in the front row in the second seat. She turned around because the room had gone strange, and she saw her son, and she made a sound, and she stood up so fast the folding chair went over backward, and she said, "Leo." And Leo Danner stopped about 11 feet from his mother, in front of 400 people and 1,100 more on a live stream, and he held the envelope against his chest and he said, in a clear voice that a microphone on a gimbal picked up perfectly, "You told everybody I was dead. I was in Idaho. I wrote down all the days." Kirk Halloway's phone hit the concrete. Brady Danner stepped forward then, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not look at his wife at all. He looked at 400 people, and he said, My name is Sergeant First Class Brady Danner. 2 years ago, this town gave up 11,000 hours of its own life to look for my son. In your fields, with your fuel, on your own time. You were lied to about him, and you were lied to about me. So I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm just going to stand here for a minute and let you all look at him, because you're the ones who earned it. Nobody in that pavilion has ever been able to describe what the next 30 seconds sounded like. Deputies took Kirk Halloway in the parking lot at 7:41. Federal agents took Thora Halloway at her home at 6 the next morning, which was Inspector Purnell's decision. She said she was not going to arrest a woman in front of her child, no matter what that woman had done, and Brady never forgot that she said it. It ended, as these things do, in a series of rooms with bad carpet. Kirk Halloway went to trial because he genuinely believed he could talk his way through it, and was convicted on all 19 counts in 4 hours. The forged electronic declaration in Brady's name carried a mandatory consecutive term for aggravated identity theft, the count nobody had thought much about at the beginning, and the one that mattered most at sentencing. He received 216 months. Thora Halloway pleaded. Her allocution lasted 9 minutes and was, by every account, mostly about herself. She received 144 months, a restitution order, and a permanent termination of parental rights she did not contest, which was the only mercy she ever showed her son. Bennett Sorrell cooperated, was disbarred, and served 29 months. The $460,000 was largely gone. What came back slowly. The house sold, the fund's remaining balance returned, the bonding company on the conservatorship paid. Leo's account was restored to $381,000 and reblocked until he is 18, with a new order Brady asked for personally. No petition affecting that account may be filed, heard, or granted without personal service on the father, verified by the clerk, and a mandatory 14-day waiting period. Sid and Carla Roby were never charged. They drove down from Idaho for the sentencing in a truck with 240,000 miles on it, and Leo sat between them in the gallery, and Carla held his hand the whole time. Rita Lindquist's story ran on a Sunday under a headline the paper set in the largest type it owned. "We got it wrong. Here is everything." Beneath it, she printed her original article in full, and then, line by line, what was true. The award she won for it hangs in the front office of Bell Harrow Elementary, where Leo went back to 4th grade in the fall. Edith Fontaine, 73, brought her journal to court in a plastic grocery bag and explained to a jury, with some asperity, what a notary journal is and why she had kept one properly for 41 years. The jury foreman told a reporter afterward that her testimony was the moment it was over. And on a Thursday in October, Sergeant First Class Brady Danner drove to Kansas City to fly out on a 9-month rotation, with his sister Beth in the driver's seat and a 9-year-old boy in the back who would be living with his aunt and going to school 2 blocks from her house and video calling his father 4 times a week. At the curb, Leo got out and hugged him around the ribs hard enough to hurt. Then he stepped back and pulled a laminated card out of his coat pocket. It was a new one. Brady had made it at the same copy shop by the grain elevator for $4 and change. And this time, Leo had picked the photograph, the 2 of them on the tailgate of the truck with a bag of donuts. "Dad," Leo said, "say it." Brady Danner, who had rebuilt 4,100 people out of vaccination cards and school lists, and 1 boy out of 406 pieces of garbage in a rubber band, put his hand on the back of his son's head. "See you at the gate," he said. "Hey, it's Brady again. The part that still keeps me up isn't the pavilion, and it isn't the sentencing. It's the 11 minutes. A judge who was not corrupt, in a county that was not crooked, using a process working exactly as designed, made my living son legally dead in 11 minutes, because the only person on earth who would have objected was in a tent with a satellite connection and no standing, and because the address on the service list was a house I wasn't allowed to enter. Nobody had to bribe anyone. They just had to make sure the system was talking to a mailbox my wife controlled. So here is what I'd ask you to actually do, and it costs almost nothing. If there is any court file anywhere with your child's name on it, a settlement, a trust, a guardianship, a custody case, call that clerk's office this week and ask 2 questions. What address and email are on the service list for me, And what does this court require to add a mandatory notice provision? Ask for a no distribution without notice order if there's money involved. If you travel for work, deploy, or drive a truck for a living, put a standby guardian designation in writing and file it, and give a copy to one person outside your spouse's family. Not because you think they'd do this, because a service list does not care what you think. And the second thing, my son survived 14 months because a man once told him, as a game, that a thing with a date on it is a witness, and he kept 406 of them. So teach your kid the boring version, their real full name, one phone number that isn't their parents', and one question only your family can answer. Laminate it. $4. Put it in their sock. Because the people who take someone from you almost never take the person first. They take the paper first. And paper, unlike people, can always be put back. Thanks for staying with me. Look after your records, look after your kids, and don't say goodbye. Say see you at the gate.